We should be. All right, wonderful. We should be recording now. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. If you joined us for our last meeting at 9 a.m., thank you. And thank you for joining us today for vegetable gardening in tight spaces, how to make the most with the least indoors and out. We'd like to say thank you to our presenters today and for all of you for joining us. Today I'm joined by Steve, who is our youth volunteer. He'll be monitoring the chat room. So if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll get to those at the end of our presentation. Today, Halton Master Gardeners gather on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe, and today they will share ideas on how to maximize space to get the best edible yields when working with limited gardening spaces. This presentation will be divided between outdoor and indoor gardens, and as we heard from Adrian Licker's Xavier today, it's that time to dream, plan, and connect with the land even when the land is covered in snow. I'd like to present today's guest speakers. Dar Corrigan is a master gardener and a member of Halton Region Master Gardeners since 2018. Prior to that, Dar lived a very urban and transitional life, moving between 3 countries over the past 2 decades. She now raises her family and gardens at home in Oakville. Her current gardening interests include indoor kitchen gardens. She continues to take courses in horticulture and learn on the job. We're also joined by Kirsten McCarthy. She is a master gardener in training and has been a member of Halton Master Gardeners since 2021. Originally from Toronto, Kirsten discovered the joy of getting her hands dirty 7 years ago by replacing an overgrown spirea with a pollinator garden, building her own raised garden bed to grow food and removing invasive species from her small urban landscape. She now raises her family and gardens at her home in Dundas. Her gardening interests include vegetable gardening, increasing biodiversity in her backyard by planting native species, and learning about building healthy soil. So I will now turn it over to you, Dar.
Hi, everyone, and my apologies to those who arrived early and saw my glitches here with the system. So I'm going without notes. I hope you'll all be a little bit sympathetic, and it's okay. I may not be able to deliver as good, but nonetheless. So thank you for having us. I'm going to focus on the indoor garden because, after all, it's a Canadian winter here. So we need something to entertain us and get us excited about what's to come in the summer. And Kirsten, at that point, will take over and talk to us about all the wonderful things that we could do in tight spaces outdoors. Okay, so. Here we go. And of course, here we go. Oh, goodness. Bear with me. Oh, my God. There we go. So, ladies, I am having such a difficult time here. Okay.
In the meantime, I just launched a poll. To get to know a little bit about our audience. So in the poll, we asked how many gardeners have already grown food indoors. I put yes or no, but let us know in the chat if you have grown food and what type of food that you grow. It's not limited to these responses, so just feel free to put that in the chat room there.
I'm starting here. Oh my God. All right. I'm trying to figure out here what.
So Dar, in the chat, Erin says, if you change back to notes and then change your Zoom sharing to select only the presentation, it may work.
Here we go. I'm not touching anything more. Okay. So the indoor kitchen garden. Okay. Here we go. Oh my God. Motivations and expectations. Okay. So the poll's popping up, but I'll just continue on. So I think it's really important before we start this really wonderful journey of growing indoors that you think about why you want to do this. I hesitate to say that this is, an adventure that's going to save you a ton of money on your grocery bill. And the reason I say that is because people's eating and shopping habits are so very personal and subjective. Where you shop, if you buy organic, how much you waste. All these things factor into a decision of whether or not, how much you spend on your garden, on your green veggies, and that will impact on how much you can save by growing indoors. But for me, a strong motivation for growing indoors is that you're going to get the best opportunity, the freshest produce. You'll have opportunities to try things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to find every day in your grocery store. And particularly during COVID, you probably noticed, with the supply chain issues. So this is, if you want to take it as a whole, I think, you will derive a lot of benefit. And if you're careful and strategic, you certainly can save money. But one of the biggest motivations for me has been the joy of, the process. I've certainly entertained myself a lot over COVID by doing this. And honestly, if I can get to the next slide, which I'm not able to do, sorry. Oh my God. I am.
Dar, if you'd like, you can email me too this slide and then I can pop it up.
So there we go. Okay. This is one of the big defining. So let's get started. Let's just move on here. Seed, soil, and pots. So these are the 4 most important things you need. And the base.
Dar, your screen share isn't up now.
Oh my goodness. All right. Is it now?
No.
Kirsten, my suggestion is at this point, yes, it is.
No, we can't see your screen.
So my suggestion, Kirsten, is you go ahead and I'm going to try and work on the back end and try and sort this out. My apologies to everyone, okay? I'm going to stop
there. No worries.
And I'm going to try and fix this.
Okay, great. So while Dar is trying to fix a little bit of the technical difficulties, I will jump in and talk a little bit about growing food outside. So thank you very much for everyone for joining us. And I am just going to share my screen with you and cross fingers that the technical glitches will. So let me try and share my screen. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, and I'm just going to go to slideshow. I'm going to try this. And I'm going to try. What do you see on your screen?
I see the full thing.
Okay, great. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit this morning about square foot gardening. And square foot gardening is a interesting method. I think it's not too old method of growing food outside. And the idea behind square foot gardening is really just how to grow more food in a smaller space. So I'm really hoping that for those of you who don't have any experience with square foot gardening, that you'll learn a lot today. And for those of you who do have some experience with square foot gardening, that maybe I can help you with some new tips or tricks. So the first thing I'm going to talk to you about today is I'm going to talk a little bit about the brief history of square foot gardening. I'd like to share with you the benefits of square foot gardening, and then also how to set up your own square foot garden, raised garden bed. And then how to use the magic of the square foot gardening plan and learning which plants you can put in 1 square foot to maximize your yield. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the benefits of intercropping. I think some people might refer to it as companion planting. And then I'm also going to touch on when to start seeds and seedlings indoors, again, to try and take advantage of our short growing season in Southern Ontario, Starting seeds inside is a great thing to learn how to do. So a little bit about the history of square foot gardening. Really, square foot gardening is an approach to growing food using intercropping ideas and intensive planting. And this is helping you to get the most food out of a small space. The history of square foot gardening is started in 1981. And the method was developed by a civil engineer and he wrote a book called Square Foot Gardening. And this book really revolutionized sort of the traditional agricultural farming or backyard farming that people were maybe used to. And this really helped people to grow food in a different way and maximize growing lots of food in a small space. It also is a great way. There was a new updated edition published a few years ago. And as we have all learned in the last few years, that gardening and being able to grow your own food in your backyard is extremely relevant. We have seen the food insecurity that people have been suffering with through the pandemic, and as well as the cost issues with the rise of prices in food. So not only is square foot gardening in the long run a very cost-effective way of growing your own food, it's also very easy to do. So some people might be asking, why square foot gardening? Why this method of gardening? And as you can see, I'm just going to talk a little bit about this photo. As you can see, this is my square foot garden in my backyard. It is a cedar raised garden bed with nutritious soil and some newly planted seedlings at the end of May 2020. So this was my second square foot garden that I created. The first one I had was in Toronto. And the benefits of it, it just makes sense to me as sort of someone sort of at the beginning of their gardening journey and growing vegetables for the first time. For me, the square foot gardening method made a lot of sense. It feels like it's very easy, it's calculated, which I really like about square foot gardening. And there are lots of benefits to the square foot gardening method. So one of the first benefits is that the planting that you do is intensive. It means that you can put quite a few plants in a 1 square foot. And this allows you to harvest and yield more plants than maybe in a traditional row type garden. It also means, so it's ideal for people with limited space. You don't need a big backyard to grow your own food. You can grow your food on a balcony, you can grow your food on a patio, and you can grow food on a smaller plot. You can put your raised garden bed anywhere. You can put it over grass, you can put it on pavement, and then you can just start planting right away. The nice thing about the raised bed is the soil that you use is hopefully just packed with tons of nutrition. And you don't need to worry about weeds necessarily. I'm not saying that there's no weeds, but there's minimal weeding with square foot gardening, which is a huge benefit to lots of people. The size recommendation for square foot gardening, a raised garden bed, is 4 foot square by 4 foot square, so 16 square feet of growing space. But you can create, and the 4 foot wide square foot gardening allows easy access. So I don't have to step into my raised garden bed in order to weed or to harvest or to water my plants. I can just reach over and be able to take care of the plants without stepping on the soil. Stepping on soil can create compaction, and this can make it very difficult for roots to grow healthily in the soil underneath. And as you know, people's bodies get a little bit older, the raised garden bed really helps to reduce strain on the body. I will often sit on the edge of my garden, on my garden bed, and weed that way. So I don't have to be bending and crouching all the time. and I find it really beneficial. I've seen people actually build a seat on their square foot garden, so they will attach another piece of wood to the edge of their garden bed, and they can actually like have a bit more of a comfortable seat if they want to sit down. And I just find this method so easy. I find it, like I said, it's pretty calculated. It's a step-by-step method for growing your own vegetables. And I find it to be very easy, especially if you're just starting your journey of growing vegetables outside. When you're thinking about doing a square foot garden, there are a few different ideas that you can have for your actual raised garden bed. And I've seen lots of different ideas on Pinterest and through different square foot gardening websites. And the most common idea is using wood. I think in some regards, it is sometimes, depending on the wood you use, it can be the most cost effective. So I'll just touch on that a little bit. Pine and redwood are very water resistant. This is definitely something you want to keep in mind when you're choosing your wood. Your wood will be in constant contact with moist soil. So cedar or redwood are the most water resistant woods to choose. Pine and fir are also less expensive options, but they do need to be replaced more frequently than cedar or redwood. The other idea that people have for a raised garden bed is maybe corrugated metal, aluminum, or steel. This has pros. It has a really kind of cool industrial look to it. But I've read that it can be difficult for a first time to set this up. Oh, sorry, just a quick note back on talking about the wood is that the making sure not to use recycled wood if you're going to choose wood for your raised garden bed, or treated lumber, because both of those options can have chemicals that will leach into the soil and damage your plants and kill them. So we have wood, we have corrugated metal as an option. And then the last idea here is to maybe use a cinder block raised garden bed. And I love this idea just because not only can you use the larger space to grow your vegetables, but this gardener has put herbs and flowers in these smaller crevices of the cinder block. And so really maximizing the space of this particular idea. Maybe the downside to cinder block is it's extremely heavy. You will need really lots of muscles in order to build this kind of square garden bed. And but those are some different ideas for some materials that you could use for your raised garden bed. And cinder block also has a tendency to heat up a lot in the summer. So that's something else too. It holds the warmth, it holds the heat of the sun. So that's something to consider as well when you're researching how you want to build your raised garden bed. So once you decide on a garden bed and where you want to put your plants, the next thing that you really want to think about are the location, the soil, and then creating your grid. Location is very important, especially if you want to grow vegetables like fruit-bearing vegetables like tomatoes and peppers. You want to put your raised garden bed in a location that has 6 to 8 hours of sun per day. And you also want to put your raised garden bed in a north-south facing direction. This ensures that your plants will get the maximum amount of sun throughout the day. So the soil that you choose for your raised garden bed, if you read the Square Foot Gardening book or go onto their website, they will recommend what Mel Bartholomew has coined Mel's Mix. Mel's Mix is a 1/3 of peat moss or coco coir, 1/3 of vermiculite, and 1/3 of a good blend of compost. And then what you do is you dump all of that into a massive tarp and mix it up and then put it into your raised garden bed. There are pros and cons to Mel's Mix. I have heard that it can be quite expensive at first to use Mel's Mix, because the compost that he recommends is a mixture of 5 different composted manures. So that can be difficult to find, and also can be a little bit expensive. So for soil, I don't use Mel's Mix. I have used what I found to be just as good. And I buy the black garden soil from Big Yellow Bag, and at the beginning of the spring. And I take 3 parts of that black garden soil and I mix it with 1 part of vermiculite. And then I put that's how I filled my raised garden bed. You do want to just make sure whatever soil that you use, that it has excellent drainage, it has good nutrients, and that it also has some compost in it. When I harvest my vegetables at the end of the season, I just supplement that space with some fresh compost, and that ensures I'm adding nutrients back into the soil. So after you have your soil in your raised garden bed, the next step is to choose your grid. So as you can see on the right, this is probably just some lath, scrap lath. You can use bamboo stakes cut to size and then maybe nailed or screwed into the edge of your raised garden bed. The other idea that I use and I find to be completely suitable is I just I hammer U nails into the edge of my raised garden bed, and I just tie jute twine to create my grid. This isn't something that lasts year after year, but I don't really need it to. So I will just create my grid at the beginning of the season and then take it down at the end of the season when I put my garden bed to bed for the winter. And I find that this works just as well. And it can be less expensive than trying to find the bamboo or the scrap wood to place your grid. You can also buy grids that are pre-made for square foot gardening that just snap together. And some people find this to be very useful as well. So now that you have your garden bed in place and you have your soil, the next thing to do, or maybe even before you do any of that, is to plan your garden on paper. When Shiloh was talking a little bit about dreaming, this is the perfect time of year to really start dreaming about gardening. And there's no better way to do it than to get all your seeds together and get a piece of grid paper, graph paper, and start to plan out your garden on paper. There are a lot of benefits to planning out your garden on paper before. And one of the things that is really helpful is being able to see where your plants are going to be in your square foot garden, and doing things like making sure the taller plants like your tomatoes or your tomatillos are at the north end of your garden so they don't block the sun for these plants that are smaller. So you want to, when you are planning your garden, you want to think about the height of your plants. You also want to think about the days to harvest of your plants, and then also the sun requirements of your plants. So putting it on paper starts the dreaming process, and you can really start to get very, very excited about the upcoming gardening season. The other benefit is if you are mixing tall plants with a blend of shorter plants, then you can put your tall plants in the middle of your square foot garden and put your shade loving plants on the north end, and then your sun loving plants on the south end. So you can start to play. And I always plan my garden in pencil just because I'm always changing my mind and doing some research and tweaking it and everything. One of the things that, again, is really beneficial about this is you can keep and hang on to your garden plants year after year. And this really helps you. It's like a garden journal. And I find that this is really beneficial, to remember where you planted your tomatoes last year and where you planted your beets. And this is really helpful because you want to make sure that you rotate your crops. So if I know I planted my tomato in one square last year, then this year I will make sure not to plant my tomato in the same square. And this just makes sure that we're keeping the nutrients of the soil in balance. So I use this, and it's fun. I've looked over my square foot gardening over the past few years and seen the changes that the garden has gone through, and the changes that I've made, and the successes and the failures. And it's actually really beneficial to put your garden on paper first. And this is a little bit of sort of the magic of the square foot gardening for me anyway. And when I saw this chart, this is what helped me to decide that I really wanted to try this method of growing vegetables outdoors. And the square foot gardening method has a garden plan guide. And it's not set in stone, it's not a rule, but it is a really helpful guideline. And what the square foot gardening method does is it gives you ideas on how many plants to put in each square foot. So if you can see on my screen here, we have the different vegetables. And then you can see here that if you are interested in growing tomatoes, that your tomato plant is going to use 1 square foot of space. So they give you the number of plants that you should be putting in 1 square foot of space. So you would put 1 seedling of your tomatoes in your square foot, or 1 if you're trying to grow from seed, which could be challenging in our short growing season, then you would just put 1 tomato seed in that space. Same thing with peppers. Peppers need a lot of space. So I only put 1 pepper in 1 square foot of space to give it the maximum room for growth. And it also ensures that the spacing is good from plant to plant. If am interested in growing onions, for example, I can put 9 onions in 1 square foot. And again, this helps to make sure that I'm not crowding out the other vegetables. And it also allows the reduction of weeds. So once again, the idea is to reduce the amount of weeding that you do by doing more intensive planting. Carrots, for example, you can put 6 carrots in 1 square foot. And then you can put 4 pole beans in 1 square foot. Now, I didn't mention it, but also many people also, when they are planning their square foot gardens, they will put a trellis up one side. And if you are growing things like pole beans and that kind of stuff, then they can obviously climb the trellis that you put on your square foot garden. So this is when I started to realize that this is what the square foot gardening method was all about. This made sense to me, that I could just sort of follow this guideline and see how many radishes I can put in 1 square foot versus how many pumpkins I can put in 1 square foot. So for me, this just made a lot of sense. And it's a really, really useful, very easy way to ensure that you're growing the correct number of plants or seeds in 1 square foot. The other really interesting thing about square foot gardening, and one of the things that makes it so great for making sure that you're getting the most out of a small space, is this idea of intercropping or companion planting. And intercropping, what we do is we take 2 different kinds of vegetables and we put them in the similar space. So for example, if you want to plant pole beans in 1 square foot, then you can intercrop it with something like lettuce. And the pole beans will shade the lettuce so the lettuce won't bolt as easily because they're being shaded a little bit by the pole beans. Another idea for intercropping are things like putting short-lived crops like baby carrots or radishes or short-lived greens, and intercropping it with longer season crops, as they'll be finished long before the main crop gets big enough to crowd them out. Another example of this could be planting beets in between carrots in your grid. So by the time the beets are ready to be harvested, then the carrots can move in and take up the space that the beets were using previously. So when we are using the square foot gardening method of planting vegetables, it's important to make sure that you have a diversity of vegetables in your garden. And this will just make sure that there's less disease and less pests. Often if there's lots of one vegetable or plant in a garden, it increases the risk of pests and disease. The other thing I find with thinking about reducing pests and disease is I actually plant marigold around the edge of my square foot garden, and this can really help deter pests. Another idea that people have talked about is planting alliums, onions, garlic, leeks and shallots will also keep insects and pests away, but making sure to keep those alliums away from beans because they don't like each other very much. And one of the things that's important to keep in mind when you are thinking about growing vegetables in Southern Ontario, we have a very short growing season here. Usually, I don't know, 150 days or something, not even. And so it's really important to grow, maybe start your seeds inside, indoors. And if you are thinking about growing vegetables outside, on the back of the seed packet, it will suggest and recommend the sowing instructions for growing seeds inside. It'll also maybe have instructions for cold stratification and some other things that can help germinate those seeds. And generally, I just sort of create a little chart like this to help me remember, or again, you can use a calendar. And I find that very helpful so I don't forget. So 10 weeks before the last frost is when I would start my pepper seeds and my strawberry seeds indoors. And the last frost date in Southern Ontario is about May 17th to 18th this year, I think. But I generally, as a rule of thumb, I usually don't start planting anything outside until the May 2-4 weekend. It's like, for me, it's the first official long weekend of the summer. And I spend all 3 days getting my hands dirty and planting my square foot garden. And it's one of the most exciting weekends for me in the summer. So 8 weeks before the last frost date, March 15th is when I will start planting my thyme seeds and my tomato seeds. And then 6 weeks before the last frost date, I will put in my tomatillos seeds. And then 4 weeks before the last frost date, around the end of April, I will start planting my basil and my cucamelon. And this idea of sort of staggering and making sure that you're planting your seeds at the appropriate time will make sure that they're strong enough and that they are mature enough to transition into being planted outdoors. If you are starting seeds inside, about a week before you are going to transplant, maybe 10 days, make sure to harden off your seeds. And this is a process by which you gradually bring your plants outside over the course of about a week or 10 days before you plant them to help them acclimatize to the outdoor weather, the wind, and that kind of stuff. So you know that they will survive the outdoors. So hardening off your seedlings is very important if you're thinking about growing food outdoors. And just before I finish up, I would just like to show you a little bit of my garden from last year, the growing season. So this is my square foot garden from June 2021 to August 2021. And you saw in the very first slide when it was planted at the very beginning of the season. And by June, that garden is really starting to take off and thrive. I have here, as you can see, my marigolds around the edge of my square foot garden. And I find in my experience, this really helps to deter pests. I very rarely have come into seeing my garden in the morning and seen a lot of holes and a lot of my seedlings and plants thrown on the ground by chipmunks or squirrels. So in my experience, the marigolds do really help. I'm growing in this garden. On the left, I'm growing bok choy, I'm growing carrots, I'm growing peppers, sweet peppers, as well as hot peppers. I'm also growing tomatillo, and I'm growing zucchini in this garden as well. I think the guideline for zucchini is giving them 1 square foot. I would edit that a little bit to give the zucchini 2 square feet, because my zucchini completely overtook this square foot garden last summer. So lesson learned. And that's what gardening is all about, is experimenting and seeing what works and doesn't work. So I'm growing lots of different things here. And as you can see, by August, my husband called this, by August, he called this my jungle. And as you can see, my tomatoes and my tomatillos are really are growing quite well and quite fast. This is a south-facing part of my garden, and my larger plants, my tomatillo, is on the north side of my garden. And then just a small picture to show you a little harvest. I was able to harvest some carrots, zucchini, some bok choy, and some sweet peppers. And as well as some romaine lettuces that I was growing as well. So this was just one of the harvests. The tomatillos at this time were just starting, they had tons of flowers on them. But by August and September, I was harvesting tomatillos almost once a week. I had so many tomatillos this past summer, and I made salsa verde like 5 times. So it was very, very successful. I was excited. I'm excited to do it again this year. So I encourage you, if you don't have any experience with square foot gardening, I encourage you to try it out. You don't have to spend an awful lot of money to get it started. And it is a really fun and easy way to start growing vegetables outdoors. And I just wanted to thank you very much for listening to my presentation this morning. If you have any questions about square foot gardening, I'd be happy to share my experiences with you. Please email me, and my email address is kirsten.mccarthy@gmail.com. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Kirsten. So we are going to give the floor now to Dar. We see a lot of great questions coming in, so we will try to get to those at the end if time permits.
Okay. So I am going to start off by apologizing to everyone for wasting time before. My apologies. I'm going to get right to it, and hopefully I do not take too much of your time and we don't go over too much. We talked a bit, or I tried to talk a bit about motivations, and I hope that being all excited, having heard Kirsten's presentation, you'll think, oh, I want to get at this now, and you'll contemplate perhaps growing an indoor garden and spicing up your life that way, which is something I do. I'll try and focus on and the goal of this presentation is to give you some inspiration to do this without spending a fortune and without taking too much space in your home. So the first thing to think about in this whole process is what you're going to grow. And you really do have to put some thought into this and be strategic, because don't grow a lot of kale if your family's not going to eat kale. And while, you know, We would all love to perhaps grow, well, I know I'd love to grow mangoes and potatoes and limes and lemons and all these things in my basement. It's not at all realistic. You're going to have to think about things, obviously how much space it's going to take, how much soil you're going to require, what size pots you're going to need. So if you want to do a lot with a little, your goal really is to think about size of the containers, what the root system is like, and how the growing, how much time it'll take to grow these things. So with those considerations in mind, because bigger pots equal bigger problems, with those considerations in mind, these are the tips I use to identify growing options if you're going to be growing indoors. So you really want to read your seed packets. You want to look for container-friendly varieties and paying attention to growth periods. Your seed packets can tell you so much. Often, a lot of good companies, and I know that Green Venture is going to provide you all with a resource list at the end. So if I make reference to any companies or products, you'll get links to those later. For example, West Coast Seeds have on the front of their seed packets a little a picture of a container. So you know right away, it makes it easy. This is a type of product of seed that can be grown indoors with not a lot of soil, and they'll have good seeds. Will have how many days it takes for it to grow fully. Another great supplier of seeds locally is William Dam Seeds, and I know that Kirsten shops there and has great things to say about them. This is a little bit just to give you some growing options. These are the things that I currently have growing in my basement right now. So I have 3 kinds of lettuces. I have 5 or 6 types of microgreens, and I have some herbs growing. I literally grow all of this on a 2x3 footprint, so 2x3 feet, and all of this is growing, and it totally keeps us in greens throughout the year. For those of you who are not familiar with microgreens, these are the small little edible greens that come up quickly from but they're not the same as sprouts, but it's before the full plant emerges, and they are chock full of nutrients and proteins and vitamins and all kinds of wonderful things. And this is really the superstar of the indoor garden. And this is what allows you to, well, in my opinion, what allows the indoor gardener to keep things interesting, because you can grow so many delicious things chock full of nutrients in a short amount of time. So I like to mix those in with the lettuces and the herbs, and I'm going to show you lots of pictures of those a little later on as we go. So after you identify what you're able to grow and what you're interested in growing, the next big thing obviously is to think about is soil. And soil here, it's important that you pay attention to this. This is not outdoor garden soil. This is not I wouldn't even say container soil. You be good to your plants and they'll be good to you. The best, in my opinion, is going for a seed sprouting mix. And there are a bunch of varieties out there. And I'll just show you quickly. This is my favorite brand. So this is approved for organic stuff that you want a seed starting. And the reason for that is that your indoor garden is not helped along the way. Your outdoor garden is. Mother Nature doesn't help out. So we don't have the nutrients. We don't have all the different things going on feeding our plants. So you have to be good to your plants with soil. The third part of the indoor garden is your pots and seedling trays. So this is actually important because if you're thinking about, again, keeping it tight and growing as much as you can in a small amount of space, you want to make sure that all your components fit together on your footprint. Before you start strategizing and before you purchase anything, my strong recommendation is that you think about what you may already have on hand and what you're able to repurpose. So I'll show you a couple of things that I've done. I've used my outdoor window boxes. So when I first started my indoor garden, I just used these. And as you can see, I'm growing kale, and this is Tom Thumb lettuce. And this is great because they're rectangular. So I was able to put 4 of these in a row on the bottom of my veggie cart, and I'll show you pictures of those a little later on. I also, at a later point, and you'll see I use a lot of soil here. I would have, after this, I usually use less soil. These are repurposed garden pots from the garden center. So these are annuals. These pots, you can possibly make out the Terra symbol on them. So, repurposed pots that you have lying around, bunch them close together. And there you see I have a bunch of different lettuces growing around. On front is actually chives. Here again, another bunch of recycled pots. These are baby lettuces. They haven't gone, that's probably 2 weeks, probably 3 weeks old. So that's basically what you want to use or hope to use for your lettuces. As you notice, though, my trays are sitting on, my pots are sitting on a tray because ideally, not ideally, all your lettuces will want to have drainage holes, anything you put that in, okay? That's important. And you can also be very creative with your trays underneath as well. One thing I do is I use a lot of boot trays from, IKEA sells $4 boot trays, and that's an ideal way to corral all your pots, put them on, and you can water from the bottom. This is a picture of, I was talking about microgreens before. This is your standard 10 by 20 tray. This is your best investment for growing microgreens. They usually cost about $4 and come with the dome, the clear dome on top. Microgreens are, your best bang, like I said, your best bang for your buck. And ideally, you put 2 inches of soil, you put your seeds on top, you mist, and put the dome on top until germination. You pop it off once the seeds start growing, the dome that is. And here's a picture of some very happy arugula that is grown in the 10 by 20. So let me see what's coming up here. So that's an idea. I just want to mention one thing. A lot of these 10 by 20s, they don't have drainage holes at the bottom. You don't necessarily need the drainage holes for the microgreens. A lot of people don't grow them. In my experience, if you're, I like to put drainage holes in them and put them on top of boot trays. The reason being, you don't have to be as particular about making sure they're misted and watered all the time. So if you're a person who's working outside the home now, you probably want drainage holes. So you mist your seeds while they're germinating or about to germinate. And then after that, things get a lot easier. You just water from the bottom and you don't have to think about not letting the soil dry out, and you don't have to worry about overwatering. So things with drainage holes always work better. You can still purchase these for $4, no problem. Use a hammer and a nail even if you want to put holes in the bottom, and it all works out well. So after you manage your seeds, your soil, and your pots, the last bit of this puzzle, and it's quite frankly the more important or most expensive perhaps, is a place in the sun. So your beautiful indoor garden will need a spot in the sun, and that means lights. So this is typically your most expensive component, and this is where I think it becomes a lot harder for people to wrap their heads around, especially if you're trying to do this to supplement, food at home. It doesn't make sense to go out and spend a fortune on these setups at home. So I'm going to show you some products that are on the market, but I'm also going to show you a lot of do-it-yourself versions that I did myself, and that are a lot less expensive than what's on the market, and certainly help you capitalize on using just a little bit of space to grow a lot of things. So starting with what's out there, these are some very pretty carts. They're Lee Valley, and you will see these type of things, lots of places, lots of garden centers. And they're great. They're on wheels. You can roll them around. The problem is the little guy is $550 plus tax, and the second one is over $1,000 once you put in the taxes. And that's if you can even get them, because often they're out of stock. So when I was looking at this and when I started growing indoors 3 years ago, I thought, I'm going to try and make something, So here are a couple of examples of things I've done, really small scale and good if you just want to dip your toe into this and try it out before you decide whether or not you want to invest or build and go bigger. So this next photo is as basic as it could get. This is literally my basement in my workroom, and this is a lamp we already had in a workspace, and I just put in a Miracle Grow LED grow light. So I bought this on Amazon during the pandemic, And that's your $4 tray. And right there, you can see baby sunflower sprouts. Sunflower seeds growing, microgreens, which, by the way, are delicious. So that is, So that's right there, $20. You're in the market tray. Oh, that's lovely. This is just a slight step up. This is a $20 greenhouse. And this is, totally not necessary. This is if you want to keep it pretty on your counter. Perhaps you have a light in your kitchen that you want to use. Change out the light bulb, LED, and you have your herbs growing nicely on the counter and kept warmly in the nice little shelter of the $20 IKEA greenhouse. Then, if you want to try something, this is something I built literally with pieces of junk wood in my basement. And to make it look not so ugly, I painted it black. And I attached a single light. And again, Green Venture will provide a resource list with all where you can get these lights. Pretty much each row of lights, other than the light bulbs, which cost about $20, these cost anywhere between per row, I would say $35 to $45. And this is just simple. I literally screwed 4 screws, attached it, and there you go. Here's next level up. If you're willing to try 2 levels, again, not super pretty, but this is just me starting to grow some lettuces. This is a lac table from IKEA, $15. I had it at home. We were using it, I don't know what for. I don't know if I used it for shoes in a closet or something like this. And again, I just attached the lights, and those are the trays, the boot trays that I was talking about earlier. And then, if you think about it, you could, go back to this. You can stack these 2 things that I just showed you. So you can put this double tier on top of the other one. And there you go, with a super tiny footprint, you have 3 growing options right there together. So this next photo, this is something my brother bought. So it's something very similar to this, inexpensive from Home Depot or something like that. So you could just simply look for a garage grade shelving, and he attached lights to that. He raised the lower shelf, so he actually had 4 growing stations, and that was easy for him. He had just attached lights to that. I made things a little bit more complicated. I'm going to show you my next slide. This is my homemade grow cart. This is something I purchased, an AV cart from a garage sale. Actually, a school is having a fundraiser, and I purchased an AV cart for $20. And you probably can recognize these are or different forms of the structures I showed you in the earlier photos. I just added them in and created more layers, more growing layers. And this is what I use right now. It's literally 2 by 3. And this is what I grow everything in that I referred to earlier in the presentation. And I just move the pots around depending on how much height they need, what stage they're at. I've used all kinds of different growing lights. I have the LEDs in there. I have the more traditional grow light bulbs. I have sun blasters and that I've purchased at the local garden stores, that I've purchased at Amazon. I've tried them all out, and they all do a little bit of a different thing, which has been fun and part of my learning journey. On this next page, I just want to, if I have convinced you to give any of this a try, I just wanted to provide you with a few little extra planting tips, things that have made it easier for me over time. I put my garden cart on on a timer. So basically you want to run your lights 10 to 14 hours a day, maybe 10 to 12. So much easier if it's on a timer. And you don't have to think about it. You don't overstress your plants or neglect them. You probably want to label and record dates so that you know what's going on, certainly at the beginning, before you're comfortable identifying everything. And, it's always easier, as Kirsten said, to keep a little bit of a record of what you're up to. And it helps you correct any mistakes you may have made or any incorrect assumptions. You do want to keep an eye on humidity level. Make sure there's a fan perhaps on standby, dehumidifier. Think about your microgreen crops. So I wrote double up on your microgreen crops. They sometimes regrow a second round. So you may want to consider investing in those. I will say offhand, those seeds are more expensive, but you're not, they are better bang for your buck than most other seeds. So don't be deterred by the sticker price, because you get way more from a packet of microgreen seeds than you would get from lettuce seeds. Next tip is set up near water and electricity, but not too close. And certainly before you start connecting all kinds of wires and extensions, be mindful of, risks, hazards, take all these things. Do not set your house on fire. And then the last tip on this page is cycle out when ready. So as your food becomes ready to eat, my strong suggestion, and here's a little photo, is move it upstairs, move it into your kitchen so it's ready to eat. So when I grow things in little pots and I see that things are good to go, I bring it upstairs, I put it on the kitchen counter. Does two things. It encourages my family to eat healthy, add it to salads, to sandwiches, whatever. Make it, if it's in front of them, they'll eat it. I've got teenagers, that's how it is. You have to put it right in their face or they don't do it. And also frees up space in your dedicated grow cart. So if you really want to maximize and take advantage of everything you have, dedicated, then you want to move it out as soon as it's ready. Here's another photo. So I bring up full trays upstairs, leave them on the counter. This is arugula, I believe. And there you go. To make it interesting, I put scissors right out there. And that way the kids will eat it. So my teenagers absolutely love the pea shoots. Most kids do. If you ask anyone who grows this, pea shoots, kids absolutely love them. So, and we put them in everything. This is just a little quick photo, how I label, so I know what's going on. It's absolutely nothing sophisticated here. I just break popsicle sticks left over from my kids' arts and crafts days, put the date on it. That way I know what's going on, what to expect. Helps me just keep an eye on things. And then there's last final point I want to say that's important tip: stagger your planting. To avoid, so if you're just going to plant one crop, that's fine, that's great. But if you plan on going big and planting a bunch of things, my strong's do not plant it all at the same time, because you'll be staring at bare pots, and then everything will come in, grow up and all be ready at the same time, and then you'll waste your food. It's just, so you really want to stagger. So your first week, plant one kind of lettuce, plant two kinds of microgreens, plant an herb. Second week, another kind of lettuce, two microgreens, another herb. This is just a loose idea, and so on. By the time you get to week 3, you'll have full on 2 10 by 20s growing of microgreens. You have week 4, you'll have so many more options. By week 5, your lettuce, your microgreens will be coming in, and you'll start to really be able to benefit from having a staggered planting and a legitimate source of green vegetables in your diet. So on this next page, I have a little video. Not sure if it's going to show. This is what caused our technical glitch at the problem. I tried to correct a video and everything went sideways. So I don't know.
So I've laid out 3 trays here to show you how staggered planting can look. The first tray right here, I have lettuces that are about 3.5 weeks old. You can see them all growing nicely in their pots. Next to that, I have lettuces that are probably at the point of, I'd say, 5 weeks, growing nicely. And over here in the final third one, I've put a tray of lettuce that is about 8 weeks. So about 50 days in. You can see they're nice, fully ready to eat lettuce, ready for harvesting at this point.
So here's a little few pictures of my lunches. So you see, we use this in every single way. They are sandwich toppers. Those are sunflower seeds. In the middle is a bunch of everything. On the end is garnishes for my kids' tacos. Here we put, what's going on here? This is kale. Oh my God, delicious kale microgreens, just terrific. And there you go. I'm rushing to get to the end because my delay at the beginning caused us to be a bit late. So my apologies again sincerely for the glitches at the beginning, but I certainly hope that this quick little presentation has encouraged a few people to think about what they can do and grow indoors now. And it could be, as we wait for things to warm up outside. So thank you. My email address is there. If you have any questions, by all means, send them. I'm happy to answer them. I've learned through plenty of mistakes. So, and also if you have any tips and if you've grown anything super interesting that you want to